Today on episode number 99 of the podcast, we're discussing how emotions can manifest themselves after losing your sight. What's up, VIPs? Welcome to Life After Sight Loss Radio, the podcast helping you discover life after sight loss. My name is Derek. I am your resident VIP, aka visually impaired person, and joining me across the table, as always, is our resident sighted supporter, my lovely wife, April.
Hello.
All right, so here we are, episode 99.
Woo!
We are almost there. If you are listening to the podcast and you've been with us for a while, thank you so much. We've got a special episode coming out next week for number 100.
Yep.
It's going to be exciting, so make sure you are subscribed and all that good stuff. Yeah. Today, number 99, we're talking about emotions. Now, we talk about emotions quite a bit on the podcast, but it's always good because they come back up a lot in our
absolutely.
lives.
Yes.
Today, we're going to talk about how emotions manifest themselves, because sometimes I think we see certain things and we're like, oh, it's this. And it's like, actually, it may be this emotion that we're dealing with.
Right.
And so we need to have sort of like the, the lens to see it correctly, not to make a sight reference, but this one or this one. But, emotions are important and they tell us something about ourselves.
Yes.
So we're going to jump into a few different ones and how they might manifest in our lives. So let's start with the first one. Number one is fear. Fear. Now, this one you might say, well, that's not really an emotion, but it's something where we are dealing with fear, with being afraid. And here's a couple of ways it might manifest. First of all, might be not wanting to get out. I know for me, there are times, because I'm a social person, there are times when I just don't want to go anywhere and do anything.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like, oh, I just want to stay home or whatever. But it can be like fear of crowds, fear of an unknown space,
right?
Fear of something like that. So, yeah, I definitely experienced that. Have you noticed me doing that at times and thinking, what the heck is going on?
Actually, we were talking about something this morning when we were having coffee. We were talking about an incident. It's not an incident, I guess, but an occurrence where we had taken a walk in a park and we heard some live music playing. So we kind of went and checked it out. And I was like, oh, let's go see what's going on. And Derek was kind of like, I don't really feel like it. And then he's usually the spontaneous one, and I am not. So then whenever I'm trying to be spontaneous, or I get, a whim to be spontaneous, and then he doesn't go along, then I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what I should do. Should I be like, look, we're going? Or should I be like, okay, it's fine.
Well, and it doesn't always manifest, like, you don't know it's fear of the crowd.
Right.
It might be, what a stick in the mud. Like, why don't you want to do anything? And so it's important to recognize what's going on. Now, I'm not suggesting that every time somebody doesn't want to go out, they're struggling with fear.
Sure.
But it's something to be aware of so that you're like, hey, are you afraid of what we're about to do? Is there something going on? So at least bringing up that. So
like digging deeper a little bit to kind of get to not necessarily the root of the problem, but just like under the surface a little bit, find out like what you're truly feeling. And I think that's important. Fear isn't necessarily an emotion, but it's a feeling and
Absolutely.
It's real.
Yes.
So, that fear in so many situations in anyone's life can literally freeze you from doing something that could be an amazing opportunity. So knowing that it is a feeling and it's a legitimate feeling is super important.
Yeah, and they talk about the fight or flight response, but there's a third one that a lot of people don't mention, and that is, as you said, freeze. And so you have this flight, like, I'm going to run from this. The fight, like, I'm going to head towards this problem. But then you have the freezing one where you're like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And fear causes all of those responses. So definitely if that comes up. Another thing about fear, how it might manifest, is I have giving up hobbies. Now, these might be hobbies that are difficult to do with low vision. Something like rock climbing, might be difficult to do. Not that you can't, obviously, but it's something, especially you first lose your sight. Going outdoors, into nature. There might be some hobbies that you give up because you're just afraid of what might happen because of the hobby itself. And some people might be like, oh, they're so depressed that they don't want to do anything. And that definitely could be true, but it might be the reason behind it is fear. Like, I am afraid to do this specific thing. I remember, and I've talked about it on the show before, but, when I was first in sight loss, like probably the first few months, I went to this indoor rock climbing place. And it was not that I rock climb. I mean, I'm not a rock climber by any stretch, but it was like they were, the folks who had been blind for a while were doing that. And I think there was some trepidation in me, some fear, like, what if I fall? What if I am not able to do this? So yeah, it can manifest in various ways.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, we've got anger. Now, anger is one of those emotions that you think, oh, I know what anger looks like. I definitely know anger. I can spot it from a mile away. But sometimes it's not spotting anger, it's why we're angry.
Right. Yeah.
So here I've got being aggressive towards others. Now, you might think, why are you so aggressive, especially if somebody's not aggressive? If you're being aggressive towards your family, towards your friends, towards strangers, if you're just a little bit more on edge, that sort of thing, that can be anger. And anger manifests itself in a very aggressive way, but it's not that you're angry at that person.
Right.
You're angry because of sight loss. And that's the reason I bring this up, is because it's not who you're angry or who you're angry towards. It's why you're angry. And
Right.
it has to do with sight loss.
Your anger is more geared toward sight loss, but it's being projected onto those around you, whether those people are strangers or friends or family.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
That's where it's landing.
Definitely. It's where you're not intentionally directing it at them.
Yeah.
But they're right there, so
Yep.
they're the ones who get it, which isn't fair, and you got to deal with that.
Right.
But,
and I think that's important in like the sighted supporter role, is to realize that this isn't personal towards me. This is something that you're dealing with because of sight loss, whether it's day 1 or day 5,922.
Just pull that
Random number.
out.
Yep,
That's good.
absolutely. It's just one of those things. It's like I have to remember that it's not personal, and that Derek's not angry with me. So you have to remember that your VIP is not necessarily angry with you. It's the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and it's two-sided, because the sighted supporter has to be patient. Remember, this isn't towards me. And the VIP has to remember that, you know what, you can't take it out on your loved ones.
That's true.
It's not fair to them. Now, yes, they're there. It's a safe space. Sometimes you would yell and scream or whatever. But when you're aggressive towards that person, there's a big difference between, I just want to yell and scream because I'm angry, versus I am going to thrust my anger upon you.
Yeah.
That you can't do. It's okay to be angry. It's not okay to take it out on the people around you.
True. Yes.
The other way it manifests is being short and not handling things very well. Being short, like, oh, what's wrong with this? Or having a situation that arises and all of a sudden you're just not handling it well. Or you're upset because this thing happened, and people around you are like, is this a big deal?
Yeah.
I don't feel like this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's not, but it could, for example, it might be something where I don't have access to this thing anymore. I can't view this movie. For a good example might be, we went to the movies recently and saw Ant-Man, Quantumania, which I won't spoil it for anybody. We thought it was good.
Yeah, I agree.
But the audio descriptive device, we had never been to this place before, and they had it, but it wasn't working. And I don't know why, and they never came back, because I sent, we gave it to them and never came back, and I was like, now in that moment, I was able to deal with it. I was like, you know what? I could get really frustrated right now.
Yeah.
But it's going to ruin the entire movie for me and this whole experience, and I'm not going to do that. So that would be a moment where if you see somebody getting really frustrated and angry and upset, then they might end up taking it out on you. They might just be really short, really whatever. They're angry because they didn't get to see the movie to the fullest they could have.
Right.
And that's because of sight loss.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's not the theater's fault necessarily. Sure, they should have had that thing working.
Yeah.
But it's not the theater's fault. You're blind. And that's one thing you have to remember. All right. So there's fear, there's anger. Then we've got sorrow or sadness. Now, again, this might be one of those things you think, oh, I can recognize that, but it's all behind it. Why is it? Depression for long periods of time. This is important. We all have sad days. I mean, myself, you, everybody has sad days, right? Especially when circumstances around you are sad. If you've got a death in the family, if you've got stuff going on at work, if you've got family that's given, there can be some sadness in those days, in those circumstances. But if you've got sadness and sorrow for long periods of time, circumstances go down, circumstances come up, and you're still in that funk, that is where sorrow and sadness can really express itself, especially when it comes to losing your sight. The other thing I have here is being sensitive to things. Sensitive, like we talked about anger, but in this case, being sensitive to things like, all of a sudden you're bursting into tears,
right?
And you're not sure why.
Yes.
You're just so sad at this moment where everybody else is having a good time and you can't seem to, why am I so sad at this thing? And sometimes it's unexplained. Again, this is that sorrow and sadness coming out in you because of the sight loss or just the loss that you've experienced.
That, and also just adding to that, being sensitive to the words of people around you, taking things a little more personally, taking things to heart that weren't necessarily meant to wound or hurt, but being wounded and hurt by those things that are said.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of a sudden you are, tucked away in your room and just sorrow's coming out of you and you're like, what happened? Well, this person said this. Really? Was it that big a deal? And the people around you aren't sure why it was a big deal. I think that's one of the things we've talked about numerous times here. If other people around you are like, I'm not sure what happened, it's a good opportunity not to say you're wrong. It's just a good opportunity to check and say, okay, what am I feeling?
Yeah.
What is this telling me about myself? Because if nobody else seems to find it an issue, then again, that doesn't mean it's not an issue for you. It just means that you are struggling with something beyond that specific incident,
right?
Beyond that thing that they said or that thing that happened. It's not just about that thing, obviously. It's about something deeper, dealing with sorrow. So you have to face, okay, yeah, that thing hurt my feelings and maybe I should talk to that person about it, but it's more than just that thing. I'm dealing with sorrow from a deeper place than just this one comment.
Well, and in that same instance, like whenever you're examining yourself, like trying to find someone that you can confide in that's not going to push your feelings of sorrow and sadness, depression away, but to support you in that time so that you can work through it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you need those people who you can vent a little bit.
Yeah.
They can sort of take the sadness, the anger, whatever, they can take that a little bit and hold on to you while you work through it.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes literally and figuratively. All right. And then the last one I have here is loneliness. Now, I know lots of people struggle with this, and there's a couple of instances I have here. Becoming clingy to close relationships. Clingy to close relationships. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, you're going somewhere? Okay, I'll go. Hey, you're going to do something? I'll do that with you. It's like, okay, it's fine, and I would imagine sighted supporters face this at times because that VIP has to do everything with them. And all of a sudden it's like, why are you with me all the time? It's like, well, I'm really lonely. And I didn't realize it, and I don't want you to leave because I'm lonely. And so, and I'm sure I've gone through that myself, with you and with others. Like, hey, don't leave. I don't want you to leave because I'm feeling lonely. And when you're gone, I really feel lonely.
It sets in.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I have here is avoiding some people. Now, this sounds weird, but you're leaving them before they can leave you.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm already experiencing loneliness by myself. I'm not going to have rejection and loneliness together. So I'm just going to face the loneliness. And so if you see somebody who's like rejecting relationships, like, don't you want to hang out with that person? Again, it might be something completely different, but at least it's a good opportunity to be like, are you afraid of them leaving you? And so you don't want to, do anything with them just on the off chance that they can't deal with your sight loss. Because let's face it, sight loss is not easy to deal with, especially if you've never dealt with anybody with sight loss. You don't know what to do. You're not sure how to handle it. What do you say? Where do you go? All those sort of things. And so relationships can drift apart. And it's not the VIP or the other person's fault necessarily. It's not like one of them was like, I'm not hanging out with you because you're blind. Like, if that's the case, they're a jerk and you don't want them anyway.
Get rid of them.
Yeah. But if they're just like, I'm not sure, and it just slowly drifts. And so what happens is like, well, I'll cut them off before this even happens.
Yeah.
That way I'm not going to deal with it. So yeah, dealing with loneliness is a struggle for sure. And it manifests in a variety of ways. All right, so there we go. We got fear, anger, sorrow, and loneliness. And those are just a few emotions and a few ways they might manifest after losing your sight. So my question for you today is this. Which one of these emotions have you seen in your own life? Fear, anger, sorrow, loneliness. Have they manifested like we talked about today? Have they come out in other ways? I would love to hear about it, and I know others would as well. So let me know in the comments of this video, and you can send an email to lifeaftersightloss@gmail.com. All right, before we get to our quote, we've got just a few housekeeping items for you.
If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another single episode.
And if you're listening to the audio version, you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app and consider giving us a rating and a review. Also, we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions. You can send an email to lifeaftersightloss@gmail.com.
And you can also follow us on Instagram at lifeaftersightloss.
That's right. Okay, so let's get right into it. Our quote of the week.
Anne Frank said, "Feelings can't be ignored, no matter how unjust or ungrateful they seem."
Feelings can't be ignored. A lot of times people say, well, feelings aren't your reality. You might be feeling a certain way, but that's not your reality. For example, we talked about how, I felt very sensitive when this person said something. And 99% of people around you could say, no, it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Or that's not what they meant, or blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, but the feeling you're having can't be ignored. It might seem very intrusive in your life, very upsetting in your life, but you can't ignore them. And when you try to ignore them, it makes it worse.
Right.
So we have to face them, let the feelings tell us something about ourselves, and then we can move forward in whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
So, Anne Frank, wise words for us here. All right. So we want to thank you all for listening wherever you are. And remember that sight loss isn't the end.
It's just the beginning.
My name is Derek.
And I'm April.
And we'll see you
in the next one.